hum of the sedan's engine was the only constant sound against the immense, soft silence of the late-night highway. David gripped the wheel, his shoulders tight with the exhaustion of the long drive. Beside him, Sarah was scrolling through her phone, its light a faint blue shield against the darkness. In the back, Lily, their 8-year-old daughter, was deeply asleep, curled against the window with her plush toy tucked under her chin. "Another hour, maybe less, and we'll be home," David murmured, checking the fuel gauge. His voice was thick with fatigue, but tinged with the relief of approaching safety. "This highway is dead, thank God. No traffic for miles." Sarah yawned, dropping her phone onto the passenger seat. "It's the quietest road in the state, David. Too quiet. Just focus on getting us past these last 50 miles. The mood in the car was tired, normal, and insulated by the steady rhythm of their journey. The landscape outside was a blur of black trees and empty ditches, illuminated only by the focused aggression of the high beams. They passed a specific, recognizable landmark. It was a massive, weathered billboard standing precariously tilted near the roadside. The advertisement was faded, but the image was unsettlingly clear. A cartoonish, wide-mouthed figure promoting a long-gone dental practice, captioned simply, "Dr. Smile's Gentle Care." The paint was peeling, and the metal frame was heavily rusted. Just beyond the billboard, leaning over the road, was a huge ancient oak tree with a distinct, jagged branch that had snapped off and now pointed accusingly toward the pavement. "I swear that dentist looks like a villain," Sarah commented, shaking her head. "Glad we're out of these middle-of-nowhere towns." They drove in silence for another 10 minutes. The road remained empty, straight, and identical to the miles they had just covered. David's brow furrowed. He felt a sudden, sharp prick of disorientation. His hands tightened on the wheel. "Did we?" he started, then cut himself off. Ahead, illuminated by the twin cones of the headlights, was the same distinct, massive landmark, the exact, weathered billboard with the unnervingly wide-mouthed Dr. Smile figure was tilted at the exact same precarious angle, and just beyond it, the immense, ancient oak tree with the distinct, jagged, broken branch pointed accusingly toward the exact same spot on the asphalt. "Did we?" he started, then cut himself off. Ahead, illuminated by the twin cones of the headlights, was the same distinct, massive landmark, the exact, weathered billboard with the unnervingly wide-mouthed Dr. Smile figure was tilted at the exact same precarious angle, and just beyond it, the immense, ancient oak tree with the distinct, jagged, broken branch pointed accusingly toward the exact same spot on the asphalt. "David, look at the GPS," Sarah commanded, her voice thin with controlled fear. David glanced down. The digital map was frozen. The car's position marker remained fixed on a nondescript stretch of two-lane road. He pushed the accelerator down hard. The engine roared as the car surged forward at 80 miles per hour. He was determined to break the pattern, to outrun the sudden chilling deception. 5 minutes later, they rounded a slight bend.
The sight was absolute confirmation of their imprisonment. Ahead, looming in the high beams, was the exact same heavily rusted Dr. Smile's billboard. The absurdly smiling figure, the peeling paint, the leaning frame, it was all perfectly replicated. Just beyond it, the massive oak tree, the jagged, broken branch pointing like a silent, terrible accuser. "Third time," Sarah whispered, her voice devoid of inflection. "We're trapped." David's breath hitched in his throat. He slammed the gas pedal to the floor, driving the sedan at reckless, impossible speed. He glanced frantically at the dashboard. The odometer, the car's mechanical clock of distance, was spinning rapidly, the numbers visibly counting off the miles. 81, 82, 83. They were traveling, the wheels were turning, the engine was performing perfectly, yet the environment remained locked in the same 5-mile stretch. The silence outside intensified, becoming suffocating. The normal background hum of radio static, which had been comforting, suddenly died. The car speakers erupted in a brief, low, resonant static hum that quickly faded, leaving the interior soundless. David realized the full scope of their isolation. He took his foot off the gas, letting the car drift back to a reasonable speed. He looked into the rearview mirror. The highway behind them was a black, empty void. There were no lights, no following cars, no headlights visible in the enormous, crushing expanse of the night. Even the small nocturnal animals and insects had vanished. Just the road, the sedan, and the perpetual 5 miles. Sarah, her eyes wide with mounting panic, grabbed her purse and pulled out her cell phone. She frantically tried to unlock the screen. The small digital square remained cold, black and utterly dead. She pressed the power button repeatedly. Nothing. She looked at David, realizing their technical lifeline was severed. The car moved forward, passing the unsettlingly familiar Dr. Smiles billboard for the fourth time. The cold in the car had become unbearable, raising goosebumps on David's arms despite the working heater. They were traveling at highway speed, yet going nowhere, sealed inside a moving metal box, the perpetual loop of highway their prison. As they passed the oak tree, the landscape beyond the windshield instantly shifted. The full white moon, which had been hanging high and luminous in the clear night sky, began to change color. Slowly, unnaturally, the pristine white light bled into a deep, sickly red color. The change was profound, bathing the entire highway and the surrounding forest in a disturbing, blood-colored light. The shadows of the trees reacted violently. They stretched unnaturally long, becoming distorted, elongated shapes that seemed to leap and grasp at the pavement as the red light intensified. The forest flanking the highway no longer looked like dormant woods. It looked like a wall of sharp, reaching claws. Inside the car, the freezing temperature became absolute. The air felt heavy, dense, and suffocating. David glanced at the temperature gauge, which had plummeted to its lowest measurable setting. The heat they had felt moments ago was annihilated by this sudden, profound chill. It was then that Lily stirred. She had been deeply asleep, curled up and silent throughout the terror. She sat up slowly in the back seat, rubbing her eyes. Her small, innocent figure contrasted sharply with the terrifying red light now flooding the car. David and Sarah watched her, relief battling the pervasive dread. They waited for the expected, normal question. Are we there yet? Lily didn't ask about the journey. She looked past her parents, her small hands flying instantly to cover her ears, her face contorted into a painful grimace. "Daddy, why is the bad man screaming?" Lily asked, her voice thin and high-pitched, laced with pure distress. "David!" David and Sarah froze. They exchanged a look of pure, paralyzing horror. They heard nothing. The car was filled with only the sound of the engine's hum and the distant roar of the tires on the asphalt. The silence outside was absolute. "Lily, baby, there's no one screaming," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking violently as she twisted in her seat to face her daughter. "It's just the wind."
"No, Daddy," Lily insisted, her eyes wide and fixed on the front of the car, her hands pressing desperately against her ears. "He's screaming right here. He's screaming under the road. He says it hurts. Why does he keep screaming?" The terrifying implication was immediate. The cold, the loop, the red light. It wasn't just physical. It was tapping into something deep and agonizing beneath the thin asphalt. And whatever it was, only the innocent could hear its pain. David gripped the wheel, his knuckles white, realizing their terrifying predicament had just become a lethal, impossible puzzle. The crimson light outside seemed to pulse, and the familiar stretch of highway dissolved and reset once more. They had passed the oak tree for the 5th time. David drove slowly now, his foot light on the accelerator, his gaze locked on the road ahead. He was searching for the terrifying landmark, the Dr. Smile billboard, but he was also searching for something else. The red light intensified, casting a disturbing, sharp relief over the environment. The road was not empty. As the high beams cut through the darkness, they began to illuminate figures standing motionless on the shoulder of the highway, spaced out by approximately 50 yards. They were silent, rigid, and uniformly facing the direction of the sedan. "David!" Sarah whispered, her voice a thin, panicked thread. "Don't stop! Don't look at them!" David couldn't take his eyes off the road. The first figure came into clear focus just as they passed the Dr. Smile billboard. It was the silhouette of a man, his stance unnaturally stiff. As they sped by, the headbeams caught the details. The man's clothes were soaked and torn, and his body was angled sharply to the left, his limbs fixed at impossible broken angles. His face was obscured by deep, black shadow, but the impression was one of profound, catastrophic trauma. Sarah screamed, a raw, strangled sound of pure horror, as they passed the second figure. This one was a young woman, leaning against the oak tree. Her dress was ripped, and her white face was turned toward the car. Blood, dark and thick in the crimson light, covered the side of her head. She didn't move. She just stared. The terror was absolute. These were not living people. These were the victims of the road, the lost souls caught in the perpetual loop of destruction. They're watching us, David choked out, gripping the wheel to keep the car steady. They're just standing there. Lily, still sitting upright in the back, watched the procession of horrific figures pass. Her hands remained clamped over her ears, her mouth open in a soundless grimace. She couldn't see the faces, but she could clearly hear the sound of their agony. David drove past a third, then a fourth figure, each one representing a different brutal accident. A teenager slumped over a guardrail, an elderly woman kneeling in the ditch. Their collective silence was more terrifying than any scream. They weren't attacking, they were simply present, immovable, frozen witnesses in the highway's timeless prison. The car raced past the final figure in the oak tree. The terrifying implication was clear. The deeper they drove into this loop, the more of the highway's tragic history was being made visible to them. They were not alone in their prison. The dead were their only company. David kept his foot steady on the gas, the speed now their only defense against the horrors lining the road. But the highway itself began to fight back, turning the car into a reflection of the trauma that surrounded them. The familiar hum of the engine abruptly shifted. It was replaced by a brutal, tearing, grinding sound, a horrific metallic shriek that seemed to emanate directly from underneath the floorboards. It was the unmistakable sound of metal crushing metal, of twisting axles and collapsing chassis, amplified and roaring through the silence of the night. "What is that?" Sarah screamed, clutching the dash. "It sounds like we hit something."
"I didn't hit anything," David yelled back, frantically checking the gauges, which were still reading normal. The sound was deafening, violating the car's sense of safety. Then, without warning, the windshield cracked. It wasn't a single fracture. A spiderweb pattern of sharp, crystalline fractures instantly spread across the glass from a central point, obscuring their view. No pebble had struck it. The glass seemed to have shattered from immense internal pressure. Simultaneously, thick, acrid smoke began pouring violently into the cabin through the air vents. The smell was immediate, overwhelming, and sickening. Hot burnt rubber, gasoline, and searing oil, the chemical signature of a massive collision. The cabin air became instantly toxic, forcing David and Sarah into violent, choking coughs. Lily, in the back, let out a terrified, thin cry, her hands still clamped over her ears as the internal and external chaos merged. David fought the cough, his eyes stinging. He gripped the steering wheel, trying to maintain control through the fractured, smoke-filled glass. Then, the final, terrifying symptom of the replay hit him. The steering wheel went violently loose in his hands. It felt momentarily disconnected, divorced from the actual movement of the front tires. The car immediately swerved hard to the right, tires shrieking against the asphalt as it veered toward the ditch, where the slumped figure of the elderly woman stood frozen. David felt a cold, sharp spike of absolute panic. He wrestled the wheel back with every ounce of his strength, his muscles scraping against the unseen force that had seized control. He managed to correct the skid just before the car hit the embankment. They were reliving the trauma. The grinding, the cracking glass, the burnt smell, the loss of control. These were the terrifying sensory details of an accident they had not been in, but which had happened countless times on this cursed highway. They were driving through the ghost of a fatal collision, and their car was being forced to feel the impact. David wrestled the wheel back with every ounce of his strength, his muscles screaming against the unseen force that had seized control. He managed to correct the skid just before the car hit the embankment. The car stabilized, shaking violently. The grinding under the floorboards subsided, and the steering wheel locked back into his hands. The smoke that had poured into the cabin began to clear, slowly dissipating through the open vents, leaving behind only the acrid, cold smell of burnt chemicals. As the air cleared, David wiped the condensation from the fractured windshield. Ahead, beyond the oak tree that marked the end of the looping stretch, he saw a sight that froze his blood. There was fire. Not a blazing inferno, but a sickly, localized flame, low to the ground, licking lazily at something dark and mangled near the roadside. The flickering light cast grotesque, dancing shadows that mingled with the crimson glow of the moonlight. This was the end of the loop, the final, terrifying destination. David slammed his foot down on the brake pedal. The car skidded violently on the asphalt, the tires shrieking a final desperate protest against the road. The sedan stopped abruptly, its headlights illuminating the horror barely 20 feet away. Wrapped with sickening finality around the massive trunk of the ancient oak tree was a wreckage. It was a car, a dense, crumpled mass of twisted metal, shattered glass, and steam rising from the hot, mangled components.
The engine compartment was crushed completely against the unyielding wood, and the roof was peeled back like a sardine can. The silence that followed their stop was absolute, broken only by the sharp hiss of steam escaping the crushed radiator. David cut the engine. The lack of noise was deafening. He and Sarah were trembling violently, their bodies radiating shock and fear, but they were drawn by a terrible magnetic compulsion toward the ruin. Lily whimpered softly in the back seat, still covering her ears. "Stay in the car, Lily," David commanded, his voice barely a rasp. He and Sarah stepped out onto the cold asphalt. The crimson moonlight bathed the scene in terrifying relief. They moved slowly, carefully, their eyes locked on the mangled wreckage. As they got closer, Sarah let out a sharp, choked cry, a sound of pure, immediate heartbreak that tore through the silence. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, bent steel. Illuminated by the headlights of their intact sedan, they saw the terrifying, undeniable proof of their fate. The rear bumper of the crushed vehicle, though twisted and covered in tree bark, was still recognizable. Sarah traced the faint peeling paint with a trembling finger.
The license plate, half ripped from the chassis, was their plate. The wreckage was their car. The realization struck David like a physical blow, stealing his breath. They were not reliving the trauma of others. They were trapped in the final, agonizing minutes of their own fatal collision. The figures lining the road were not strangers. They were the doomed who had failed to escape this stretch of highway. Time had frozen them in the loop of their own death. The wreckage was their car. The realization hit David and Sarah with a profound, bone-deep certainty that shattered the last vestiges of their reality. They were not survivors. They were trapped echoes of the final, agonizing moments before death. David, paralyzed by the sight of their license plate, reached out and grabbed the edge of the twisted metal door, bracing himself. He forced himself to look inside the crushed, ruined cabin of the sedan. The interior was a terrifying vision of finality. Slumped across the airbags, their bodies broken and still, were two figures. Their clothes were instantly recognizable. The jacket David wore, the pale sweater Sarah had on. They were dead. They had died here, wrapped around the unyielding oak tree. The horror of seeing their own lifeless forms was the ultimate defeat. Sarah let out a soft, heartbreaking whimper, her hand flying to her mouth, tears gushing instantly. She turned away from the wreckage, unable to bear the sight of her own shattered body. "Daddy?" The voice was soft, clear, and perfectly innocent. It came from right beside them. David and Sarah spun around. Lily was standing there on the cold asphalt, no longer covering her ears, no longer hearing the screams of the road. She had left the safety of the intact sedan. She looked pale and immensely sad, but profoundly calm. Lily reached out and gently took Sarah's hand. Her small hand was cool but comforting. "It's okay, Mommy," Lily said, her voice sounding older, wiser than her 8 years. "It's really okay now. The bad man stopped screaming. We have to go now." The denial shattered completely. David collapsed onto his knees, the exhaustion, the terror, and the immense tragedy of their fate claiming him fully. He wept, a harsh, guttural sound of heartbreak for the life they had lost, for the fear they had endured, and for the realization that their bodies were already gone. "We couldn't leave you, could we, David?" choked out, looking at his daughter, understanding the truth of the loop. They hadn't been driving for home. They had been driving their souls in circles, unable to pass the point of impact, refusing to leave their daughter behind in the empty car. As David wept, the heavy, oppressive crimson moonlight that had poisoned the highway for hours began to fade. The blood-red color dissolved rapidly, lifting the dark shadow from the trees and the terrifying despair from the air. The vast, empty landscape seemed to sigh in release. At the edge of the dark forest, a blinding, peaceful white light began to glow. It wasn't the light of the moon or the sun. It was soft, warm, and utterly welcoming, drawing their attention away from the wreckage and the cold ground. Lily gently pulled Sarah's hand, guiding her toward the light. Sarah looked down at David, tears streaming down her face, the immense sadness now giving way to a profound, quiet peace. "It's over, David," Sarah whispered, her voice gentle. "We can go now. We're safe." David raised his head, seeing the warm, beckoning light. He rose slowly, leaving the crumpled metal, the fractured glass, and the cold bodies behind. The agonizing loop of the highway had ended. They walked together, the three of them, hand in hand, toward the peaceful white light. The peaceful white light at the edge of the dark forest beckoned.
David, Sarah, and Lily walked together, leaving the mangled wreckage and the cold, terrifying loop of the highway behind them. The immense sadness of their realization was giving way to a gentle, absolute peace. They paused just beneath the dense shadows of the trees, where the light was warmest and softest.
Sarah turned, her eyes holding the immense, loving gaze of her husband and the gentle innocence of her daughter. She reached out and pulled David and Lily close. It was a final, silent embrace, filled with all the love, fear, and shared destiny that had defined their last terrifying drive. "We're together," David murmured against her hair, the words settling the fear in his soul. "We're finally together." Lily squeezed their hands tight, her small, cool presence anchoring their shared reality. They stood like that for one eternal moment, a complete, loving unit against the vast, cold emptiness of the wilderness. Then they began to walk forward, slowly, deliberately, into the warm, inviting glow. As they stepped into the light, their forms began to gently dissolve. Their outlines softened, their figures became translucent, fading into the ambient light until they were nothing more than a cluster of warm luminescence moving peacefully into the dark woods, gone from the road forever. The piercing, chaotic wail of police sirens and the frantic flash of blue and red ambulance lights violently ripped through the silence of the night. Rain was falling now, a cold, steady curtain that slicked the asphalt and made the tragedy even more stark. The highway was a scene of total wreckage. A late-model sedan was crumpled and crushed around the trunk of a massive oak tree. Steam hissed faintly from the mangled engine block, mixing with the sharp smell of gasoline and wet earth. A police officer, his yellow slicker shining in the flashing lights, knelt beside the driver's side door. He shook his head grimly and stood, pulling a heavy white sheet over the two broken bodies inside the cabin. A third sheet was carefully placed over the small form in the back seat. The officer looked at his watch, the small digital screen illuminating his tired, rain-streaked face. The time was precisely 2 a.m. The loop was over. The highway was silent again, save for the mechanical noise of the emergency crews. The Dr. Smile billboard stood tilted and rusted, its unsettling image mocking the tragedy below. The immense oak tree, a silent witness to countless disasters, stood firm, its trunk scarred by the final impact. The narrator reflects on the finality. They were just driving home from a vacation, a simple, routine journey, but on that quiet, desolate stretch of highway, time had broken. The terror, the confusion, the realization, all of it was the soul's frantic final effort to secure its lost family, replaying the moments before the inevitable impact. They had been trapped, driving in circles, until they finally found their peace together and walked into the quiet night. Some souls get lost on the way home, unable to let go of the love that binds them to the world. The road goes on forever, but their journey ended. Tell me in the comments, do you believe spirits get trapped at crash sites? If you want to hear more stories from the road, subscribe.